Hello friends, welcome to my latest community project, Healthcare Management and Strategy app built in Flutter, Firebase and Angular. Like my all other community project, this is absolutely free download with complete source code. Look at the video description for download links. In this video, I'll show you how you can include an Angular, React, Vue.js or any other HTML JavaScript app inside your Flutter app using Flutter WebView package. I'll discuss how to create and sync transaction between Flutter and Angular. These are the topics I'm going to discuss in this video today. We'll start with the product demo, then jump onto the real code. Then after we'll build our Flutter app and include WebView package to display HTML content. At last, we'll create an Angular app which will feed into Flutter WebView. We'll also discuss few design consideration about how to secure your application using CORS and authentication tokens. If you find this video useful, please like this video, give a star to this GitHub, and at last don't forget to follow me at GitHub and YouTube. Links are included in the video description below. So without any delay, let's start with the demo now. As you can see on this screen, I'm using web version of this application. However, you can use the same Flutter code base to build an iOS or Android mobile app. If you don't write any platform specific code, your app will look same on web and mobile devices. I'll close everything and rerun this app from my local machine. As you can see, I have VS Code open and this is my GitHub repository. Let's open two terminal windows. In the first window, I will run my Flutter code and other window, I will run my Angular app. In first window, cd into source directory and then start Flutter app using command flutter run -d chrome. In second terminal window, I will cd into Angular source code where package.json file is and use command ngserve. Both of these commands will take few seconds. Now this web app is running in my browser and I'm going to log in as a patient first. This patient wants to send a video message to his healthcare provider or a doctor. Now, I could have made this page using some other Flutter package, which allows to include a screen recording. But since I'm using a LOOM SDK, which is an NPM package, I'm going to make use of Angular. So let me show you what LOOM SDK looks like. So let's head out to npmjs.com and search for LOOM SDK. As you can see, this is where you can find all the related documentation related to LOOM SDK. Now, because it only works as a web app, we'll create a web app and then we'll call this Angular web app inside Flutter using Flutter WebView package. Now, we are going to log in as a doctor, which sees and reply to the patient video message. So let me log in as a healthcare provider this time. As you can see, healthcare provider sees a totally different menu. Now here, if you go to the video, and this person as a healthcare provider will see all the patient messages. To view the recording, we are going to use the Loom embed version of npm.js. We'll discuss this later. We'll also discuss how transactions which are made in Angular app are stored in Flutter Firebase database, which means Angular and Flutter create and sync transaction within the same database. And that is the functionality we are going to build today. So without any delay, let's jump out of the code now. In this section, we'll work on our Flutter app. Just to recap, there is a lot of background to this app. So if you are interested in this app, please look at the GitHub repository or watch these videos from beginning through YouTube playlist. You can also find all the code related information into this GitHub repository. Links are included in this video description. First thing we'll open is the pubspec.yaml file and we'll include WebView package. If you are in VS Code, as soon as you include any package, VS Code is smart enough to start downloading the content of your package. So I'm going to include webview_flutter, save this. And as you can see, it will start downloading the package. At this time, since we are working on the web app, this is the most appropriate package and it may change in near future. So please refer to the appropriate documentation at pub.dot website for latest package information. Now inside this src lib views user folder, we'll create two different dot files. Let's call these files loom docs.dot file and loom dot dot. One will display the message and other will record the message. All right. Now let me include these files inside app.dot file. We'll include these files into routes so that these new dot files can be included as routes or new page inside the application. Now let me go to the routes and include these two routes here. All right, in the left-hand navigation menu items, we will use these two router links so that when the user clicks on these links, it should open the appropriate Loom packages here. So in the list tile, I am going to include this link, say title equals to video. And when I click on this link, it should open that Loom dot 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 file. Loom docs, okay. And let me copy paste this entire tile. Looks good. Now we are ready to work on our loom dot dot file. In this dot file, we intend to call a web view. So first let's add Flutter material package and few other packages. Now we are going to create a stateful widget. So I'm going to use a Flutter shortcut plugin for VS Code. And I'm going to name this as Loom. Now inside this Loom class, let's define our own route. So that link we included in navigation file will be able to find this page. So I'm going to say static constant route name equals to Loom record. Now, inside this very simple container widget what we have created, I'm going to create a couple of style sheet and let's include a column as a child. I'm going to align this column to the center, and inside that I'm going to create another container with a fixed width and height. And inside this container, as you can see, I need to include the HTML content. Now, since this page is almost same as other pages, let me just focus on the main content, which is where we'll display our HTML content. So HTML content view and view type equals to, I'm just going to give it a static name, say hello world or whatever. Okay. If you look at my GitHub repo, there is a lot of app specific code written. So please ignore those for now and just focus on the web view related code. That's the main focus of this app. Now our UI is ready. It's time to call our web app. So inside init state function, first we will capture the user ID. We are doing it because we want to know who this person is, who is sending this message. And similarly, we need to know user ID in case if you want to display user's recorded message. So let's take this user ID and append it to a URL. So first I will define a URL, a string URL. And as you can see, this is going to be a localhost 4200, and later on you should change it to the Angular web app wherever you have hosted it. All right. So I'm going to append that UUID, that means universal unique ID of that user, to that URL. Now let's create a function called main, and inside the main, I'm going to call this UI.platformView registry package and access a method called register view factory. Just hover over this mouse or this function, and if you want to know more about this function and what are the options available. Here we'll just simply change the source of this parameter to the URL we created earlier. So here source, as you can see, source is going to be the URL, whatever URL we are going to pass it to whatever we have defined into the init state. Now that's it. If I hope everything compiles well, and if everything compiles well, you should have a Flutter page running an Angular web app inside. All right, this page looks good. Now, just to finish it off, Flutter and Dart side of the implementation before we jump onto the Angular side of the code. So remember we created another page called loom docs.dart. So I'm going to copy paste the entire source code and paste it over there. I'm just going to change the name of the class. So remember, one page is to display the recording options, and other page is for the displaying the recorded message. So here in loom docs.dart file, we'll simply change web app URL to access the display. So instead of record, I'm going to access the page called display. And once we jump onto the Angular side of it, you will see how these two different URLs are serving the different content. All right, so this looks good now. Now we are done with the Flutter side of it. Now let's jump onto the Angular now. In this section, we'll create a new Angular app, which will eventually feed into the Flutter WebView files we created earlier. Now, if you're new to the Angular and interested to learn more about Angular, I have a whole lot of Angular app tutorials. Please browse to my YouTube channel or GitHub repository to access these Angular apps. Now, to create an Angular app, you will need Node.js. So head out to nodejs.org and download the most current or maybe LTS version, long-term support version. Now open a terminal window and cd into a working directory. So here my working directory is healthcare management app. So I'm going to cd into that. And now I assume at this point you already have Node.js installed. Next thing you want to do here, node-v. So it will tell you if you already have a successful Node installation on your machine. Second command, npm-v. npm comes within Node, but I just it's a good idea to check the version again. Next thing I want to do here, I want to install Angular. So npm install -g, that means globally, and I'm going to say at angular/CLI. So this command will globally installed Angular CLI version on your machine. I already have that, so I'm not going to do that again. And once you have that installed, shoot that command ng version. So this will tell you what kind of Angular version you have installed on your machine. Depending on when you're watching this video, you may have a newer version plus, but this code is going to work the same way. Now, once you have the Angular installed, all you want to do, you want to create a new app. So command to do that is ng new, and you give a name to your application. It's going to ask you that if you want the Angular routing, just say yes. And next thing is if I want to ask you, because we are going to include a simple CSS, so I'm just going to include a CSS. Once you choose these two options, it's going to install appropriate NPM packages. This may take a few minutes. Once this is done, it will return back to your terminal window here. Now here, make sure that, just browse through the files it has just created. Make sure that you see the package.json file is. This is the main entry file of your source code. And inside app directory, you will see a couple of default files have been created. We'll come back to this in a minute. Now, next thing what you want to do here, nggc, and you want to create two pages here. Now, nggc is a short form of Angular generate component. Now, it's giving me an error because it expects me to the directory where the Angular app is. So remember, we have given it in my new web app, my web app. So let's go cd into that my web app is. You can only create the components in the directory where your package.json file is. So now I'm inside this directory. Now, if I shoot the command say nggc and give it a component name, it's going to create a new component here. Similarly, because I want to create two different components, one for recording, one for displaying, I'm going to create another component, nggc loom display. Let's hit enter. Awesome. So once you go to your app directory, and you will see two different folders have been created for you, loom display and loom record. Okay, now what we want to do, we want to go to our environment.ts file. And remember, because this Angular app, we need to connect to our Firebase database we have set up in Flutter. So what I want to do here, let's go include those Firebase credential inside this environment file here. So if you remember, in Flutter web index.html, we created this Firebase config. And these are the credentials it are used, which are connecting your Flutter to Firebase. So I'm going to include the same connections here. Um, but make sure that this should follow the format as you're looking at this screen. So I'm going to create a new variable, say Firebase, and inside that Firebase, I'm going to include that. Now, there are two different files out there, environment.prod.ts and environment.ts. One is for production, other is for development. As you can see in your uh, regular environment.ts file, it is production type equals to false. All right. So now, as you can see in your app.module.ts, it has already included two different routes here. So we need to add those two routes inside app routing modules. Routes are the way in Angular which allows you, which URL, for example, you click on a URL and it takes you to the page. That is the component. So that's what the route does. You have to define those routes here in your app routing module.ts file here. So recall that we have created two different components, loop record and loop display. So I'm going to import both of them here, loom record and loom display. Now inside constant routes, I'm going to define a couple of routes here. One is the default route. Default in the case when there is no sub URL, it's going to take you to the default URL. And now let's go create two different paths, one for record, one for display. And I'm going to pass a parameter URL. So in your HTTP URL, this ID is the user ID. So that's how your Angular web app knows which user is trying to record this or which user is trying to display the content. All right, that looks good now. I want to take a pause for a minute to talk about authentication and best practices here. Passing user ID as parameter here is absolutely very bad idea and is easily hackable. Instead, in production, you should either pass appropriate authentication tokens or you should revalidate users, which means asking user to log in again on web app, which is very bad idea and it's not very practical. So I would have preferred earlier method. That means passing appropriate Firebase or JWT tokens to validate user credentials so that your Angular web app already knows who you are and I have been called from the appropriate domain. What I mean by that, in addition to passing authentication token, you should also apply codes to secure your domain so that your Angular web app knows that which Flutter domain is calling me and it's going to prevent you from unauthorized access. Now, this is just a demo, so please implement appropriate security method to prevent your app from unauthorized access. Okay, so let's go back to our code now. I'm going to browse to npm.js and look for the npm SDK we included earlier. So again, this is the lot of documentation on the Loom website here. It depends on the npm package you have installed or you're using inside your Angular app. So I'm going to fast forward and cheat a little bit here because this is the implementation they have already written. All I'm going to do, I'm going to implement the same Loom SDK concept here. So inside my record.component, I'm going to include from Loom SDK all the packages like setup and is supported from Loom SDK. And then I'm going to just copy paste their app functionality here because I'm not going to do anything new. All I need to do is whenever the user click on that link, it should display the Loom recorder component here. One thing in addition I want to do here, in addition to what Loom is doing, once the user click on the save button, I want to save that Loom recording inside our Firebase database. So here, as you can see, I have already included Angular Firestore. I'm going to include those into inside my constructor here. So let's go back to our record.component.html file. Here, I'm just going to include a div and I'm going to call that Loom recorded component here, which is just ID equals to target. So here, if you can see, is going to include that component, the HTML component at the runtime. So I'm going to give it a title, not that it matters. An API key, this is the API key I have downloaded from the Loom account. So in case if you want your own account key, go to the Loom SDK and create a new developer account to get an API key. All right, this is again just a demo. It could have been anything. Here, it doesn't need to be the Loom SDK. So the point is here you're creating a web app and you're displaying that web app inside your Flutter web view. Here, just to finish it off, so remember in HTML section, I created an ID, a div, which was ID equals to target, and I'm going to not include anything else in this recorded component HTML. So here at the runtime, when the Angular app will be created, is going to find that element ID, that div, which is named as target, and is going to take that target and is at the runtime is going to initiate that Loom TypeScript code, that means HTML view, and is going to push this inside that div, which I which name is like target. So get element ID, which is the name is equals to target, and then on init, that means as soon as this Angular app component is loaded, find out that particular div, and inside that div, let's create that Loom recorded inner HTML content here. All right. So again, you can find all of this documentation here because this is, I'm a little bit hesitant to talk about this. The reason is I just downloaded from the Loom SDK and I'm just following the best practices, whatever they have recommended. All right, I'm going to pause this API key here. Configure button. The only trick what I'm going to do, this is the standard code what Loom SDK has given that. So as soon as the SDK button has been clicked, what I want to do here, that means video has been generated. But what I want to do, remember, I want to take that shared URL and then I want to save it inside my Firebase database. As you can see, there's no changes I have done to their code. I've followed their code up to this point. But now on, what I want to do here, as soon as the video is generated, what I want to do, I want to save this. So I'm going to call it a method called this.setData, and I'm going to pass that shared URL from URL, and I'm going to pass that to a setData function here. So now let's go define this function called setData. And this is the only additional code I have written. So here, what I'm going to do, I'm going to call that users collections here. Remember, like this is accessing the same Firebase database there. So inside that Firebase database, there is a collection called users. And inside that collections users, I know the user who is trying to record that. So remember that the ID is telling me who is the user ID. So inside that users, I'm going to access that user ID document. And inside that user ID document, I'm going to update that and I'm going to say message equals to URL. So that's how I'm storing that URL, that shared Loom URL, which was created inside an Angular app, and I'm saving it to the same Firebase database, so that which is used by which is used by Flutter code. All right, that's all I had to show you, and that's how you connect your Angular app to your Flutter app, and you share the same Firebase database. If you have any issue, please open an issue to my GitHub repository, and I'll be happy to help you out.
If you find this video helpful, please browse to my GitHub account, follow me, and give a start to this repository. And for more videos, please go to my YouTube account and do not forget to hit like and subscribe to my YouTube channel.